Hello everybody and welcome back to Manga Book Club. It is February and this month we have been reading Berserk. We really did just jump to the big boys, didn't we? So Berserk is this dark fantasy seinen that was originally penned by Kentaro Miura until his death in 2021 and now being taken over by Kouji Mori. It began in 1989 and is running through till the present. For the sake of any people watching in the future, this is up to chapter 375, which is as much as we've got at the moment. So Berserk. Where do we even start? This is one of those big seinen manga. This is probably what most people would consider the biggest boy on the block. When people recommend seinen manga, they're like, okay, Berserk is the top one, and then maybe Monster and Vinland Saga or Kingdom you can check out. Actually, I can't believe it slipped my mind. Vagabond, obviously. Vagabond is like number 2 seinen for most people. But people always put Berserk on top. And yeah, I totally get it. Berserk is a really good series and one I thoroughly enjoyed. But before we get into the manga itself, we probably should take a moment to address how do you describe it? The culture around some of the online discussions of Berserk. I think it's just one of those series that has been deified past the point of criticism, where people are very particular about this manga and it needs to stay as a masterpiece and no one can criticize it and it's flawless, and if you have any criticisms, you just don't understand. And as someone who reads a bit of manga and has this channel, that really irks me because I feel like every series should be able to be criticized. Like my favorite series, I'm thinking like Monster, I'm thinking like Billy Bat, they've got some real big problems in them. No series is flawless, and putting them up on this pedestal where we're not allowed to talk about the bad stuff just really frustrates me. Everyone enjoys their stories differently, and if you found this the most amazing masterpiece of your life, that's fantastic. If someone else didn't, they're not a big, dumb, stupid doo-doo head, man. They just have different tastes in stories. Anyways, I'm just preempting the fact I'm going to say some negative stuff about this manga. That's really it. Yeah, is that just me? Is that just me? I find Berserk is just one of those things you can't really criticize online because people get very frosty very quickly. So what's the basic plot of Berserk? Well, we have our swordsman Guts who goes on this big revenge quest to kill Griffith. That's essentially it, along the way realizing if his vengeance is really worth it. So let's actually get into the story. We open up with Guts balls deep in a monster, which is an evocative way to start. I think that really summarizes this whole like little opening sequence, summarizes the manga pretty well as the dark fantasy that it is. You got Guts in the monster, and then he pulls out, kills the monster, walks off to his next contract. And it's like, okay, this is the kind of story that we're going to be reading. And the opening chapters in the, Black Swordsman arc. Sorry, I don't know the names of the arcs yet. So the Black Swordsman arc, those opening chapters, really interesting. We've got Guts going through and defeating these different apostles, and then we get to see like all his different powers and abilities, and I mean powers in the more physical sense, like his athleticism and the fact he's got a cannon in his arm. The only thing that feels, I guess, a bit out of place, particularly in this part of the story, is Puck, because it's this very dark fantasy that has got Puck in there to kind of alleviate some of the darkness to have it not be oppressive. And to that end, I kind of understand it, but it also, Puck still feels out of place. Does anyone else feel that way? That Puck, especially in this opening couple of chapters, Puck just feels very out of place and shutting down a otherwise very dark story, especially when he gets kind of like the chibi moments and you're like, what are you doing, mate? But then the end of this arc is where the God Hand are summoned and you see Guts' rage at Griffith or Femto, and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, there is more to this story than going on. There's something deeper here. And then we cut into the whole Golden Age story, which is maybe the best part of, no, not maybe, it is the best part of Berserk. So let's talk about that. Golden Age Berserk is really good. I mean, I thought, because I've read this story before, I thought that this was a much shorter arc. In my head, the run-up to the eclipse was real quick, but then I read it again, and it's like 100 plus chapters, right? It takes a long time to get here. And I think what's interesting about this arc is that we just opened up on a much darker fantasy, and then Golden Age sort of brings it back down and focuses on the characters, and, you know, that's the stuff I love. So going into that, it was a strange transition from the very dark opening that we had, but not an unwelcome one. Seeing the relationships develop between Griffith and Guts and Casca and the rest of the crew, whose names I remembered while reading, but now have mostly forgotten again, because they'll all be dead soon. And genuinely, the Genuinely, the relationship between Griffith and Guts and Casca, that is all very engaging stuff. And watching Guts slowly open up and sort of move past his traumas and to find ways to relate and be close with other people, that's really engaging storytelling. All up until the point that he leaves and Griffith starts to push the plot a bit too fast and gets caught. He wants his castle, but he took it a bit too quickly after being upset that Guts left. And that is that was great. That was a really engaging development. Watching Griffith try to accelerate his plans without Guts there and watching them fall apart. And then you got the rescue, and then we're straight into the eclipse. And the eclipse, okay, where do we start on the eclipse? The eclipse I don't want to say it is the reason to read Berserk. Eclipse is the best moment of Berserk. I think you read Berserk for the overarching story of Guts and him figuring out his revenge. But the best moment, the high point of the entire manga, is the eclipse. We've just spent most of the Golden Age in a pretty muted sort of dark fantasy. We opened up on a much darker fantasy than Golden Age is. And then we get to the eclipse, and it is just a horror show. It is dark, everything is disgusting, and people are dying left and right, and there are just these horrible things happening, and it is glorious. It is fantastic. So I had read this before, but rereading The Eclipse, I was just stunned by how good it was. It is so well realized as this horrifying, destructive, chaotic moment. You can see why it becomes the staging ground of Guts' revenge and how disgusting and how deeply those scars are just riven into Guts' psyche from experiencing this. And the art, oh my gosh. So the art in Berserk is fantastic. Miura does an amazing job through the whole series. But the eclipse, it just comes out and shines. When Guts cuts off his arm, I am sitting there freaking out. This is so good. Everything is so well done. It is absolutely amazing. There's just so many times the art just shines. One of my favorites is seeing Guts in the earlier days with the Berserker beast sort of trailing him, and then eventually that getting incorporated into his Berserker armor. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you carried that idea forward. It looks so good. Or even some of the smaller panels. One of the ones I remember is the Kushan assassin guys. There's a shot of them where they're flexing and posing and stuff. And there is a panel of their fists coming out of the page, and you see it go over the panels and reach out, and it's so good. I think Berserk is a masterclass in how to show the brutality of movement in art. Seeing the way Guts swings his sword, or the way people are just cleaved in half, or some of the creature designs, it's all just absolutely gorgeous, and you can feel the weight and the heft behind every blow. I don't know what else I can say about the art. It's just so good. But yeah, the eclipse. We get back to the eclipse. And all of a sudden, all the sort of nice daytime, beatific, we're sitting in a castle and hanging out with princesses art is all gone. And it's just dark and miserable. And the atmosphere becomes oppressive. When Casca tries to escape with judo and then he is just cleaved in half. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. How many ways can I say the eclipse is just so well realized? I think Miura had such an idea of what he wanted to do and he just did it perfectly. There is nothing wrong with Griffith's plan. No, there is nothing wrong with how the eclipse is realized. How it is in the manga, it is genuinely perfect. I can't think of a single thing to talk negative about it. Of course, then Femto comes down and adult attacks Casca, which is very unpleasant. We should probably talk about the adult attacks in the manga. So it's in here, and for some people that's going to be a bit too much, and you know what? Fair enough. I think in a dark fantasy, that's just kind of part and parcel. I think of Game of Thrones, and there's quite a bit of that in there as well. It just seems like part of the territory to not to indulge. It just seems like part of the territory to explore this part of the darkness of humanity. Is it weird to say there are things I appreciated about its inclusion? I don't know. I feel a bit strange saying that there are things I appreciated about how it was done. Because it's such a disgusting topic. I appreciated the way its first use is plot relevant and becomes one of the key ideas behind Guts' early journey and some of the early traumas that he needs to overcome. So Berserk uses that in a very practical and proactive way. As the series gets on, it's more just used for shock value, and it just gets unpleasant. And again, dark fantasy, I think the point is for it to be unpleasant. Poor Casca, she just can't go anywhere. Anyways, let's move on. So the next arc begins, and this is is it called the Millennium Falcon arc? Really? No, it's Conviction. Millennium Falcon is next. So Conviction arc is next. And I'm still vibing this manga at this point. I think the series has peaked in the eclipse, and we are just riding that wave through this arc, because this whole arc is setting up kind of a second eclipse. So this manga is all building up to the incarnation of Femto. And so we meet the church, and we meet some of the more surrounding characters, like we meet Farnese, and we meet do we meet Isidro here? I think we meet Isidro during this arc. One of the key developments in this arc is meeting the church and their large influence on the world. I actually like the minor characters that we meet at the church with Farnese and Serpico. Like, I like them. A lot of people don't like Farnese, but I think she's really interesting. I really like her journey, and even just the way that she's explored in this early chapter, where her faith is more a shield for her own desires and her own pleasures. And Serpico just seems really interesting as someone who potentially could be a foil for Guts, or someone who is sort of on his level to hang out with, a rival or a challenger. And this all builds up to I don't know if it has a name. I in my head, I call it the second eclipse, where Femto is incarnated as I'm trying to explain some of the key locations or people in the series, and I'm genuinely blanking on the names. I can picture it in my head, but give me a second to Google this. They're at the Tower of something. Come on, baby, show me the tower. Oh, that's why it's called the Conviction arc, because it's the Tower of Conviction. Yeah. So the arc is building up to Femto's reincarnation at the Tower of Conviction. And this really feels like a big change in the manga. And it is a big change. There's this big change at the incarnation of Femto into the real world. And it's great because the ending of this arc really feels like the world is changing, and the next arcs will go on to explore that, yes, it has, and these are the ways in which it has changed. It's not just setting up this idea, it actually has plans to explore them in the following arcs. I do want to mention one of the young sells her body for money ladies, the one who's in the cult. And then she brings her boyfriend down, and the boyfriend's like, oh, no, this is a bit messed up. I might leave. And so she kills him. But then he comes back, dobs her in, and then the church come in and start killing everyone. And then afterwards, they get back together again at the end. They're like, oh, nah, we could probably work this out. It's like, hey, I'm sorry for trying to kill you, and, I forgive you for trying to kill me. So, let's let bygones be bygones and just be friends again and, maybe a bit more. What? My brother in Christ, maybe get some backbone. It's time to move on. Folks out there, maybe don't settle for someone who tried to kill you because they want because their cult said so. It's a bad move. But by the end of the arc, Femto is awoken and the world has changed, with Femto coming back to lead this new world. And I'll be honest, after this point is where my interest in the manga starts to go down. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying I'm having a bad time. I'm just saying that the best parts of the manga have passed for me. No, that's not exactly true. There are some very important moments near the very end of the manga, which are some of my favorites. But as far as arcs go, I think we've had the best ones already. We're moving into more world changes, and the character stuff is starting to take more of a backseat. It is still there, but the character stuff is no longer front and center like it was in the Golden Age. I mean, I'm a character boy. I get into the characters. That's my favorite part of the manga. And from here on, it's a lot of world stuff going on. So the world starts this big update, which actually I really like saying that this is where I start to lose interest. But this is the concepts of the Millennium Falcon arc are really interesting, with the world has changed and magic is coming back and all of these creatures have returned. And Femto has functionally changed how the world works, so people can no longer survive without magic or without him. And it's such a clever and exciting change, but the story of this arc is not as interesting. There are interesting parts, like Guts gets a whole new crew now, so he's carrying around Casca, but also Farnese and Serpico and Istora and Shirka, the witch lady. So he's got a whole gang now. And for Guts' character, that is really interesting, watching him have to rely on other people to get by in the world and feeling himself open up. Guts becomes a lot lighter through this arc, and especially into the next arc as well. But then the actual plot of this arc is mainly revolving around the Kushan War. So I've got the nation of Kushan, which is fantasy evil India, and they're going to take over the world piece by piece, and they're taking over Midland. And so Griffith comes out with all of his demons under his employ and starts to fight them back, which goes on and on until eventually Kushan is beaten. Likewise, we kind of start following some of the political inworkings of Midland and start following some of their commanders and their political structures, and it's completely lost on me, I won't lie. I think for some people this will totally be their cup of tea and getting into some of the light political workings of the Midland armies. me, I don't really care. I want to talk. I want to see what Guts is up to, and I want to see how people are responding to Griffith and how Griffith is reacting and trying to figure out what he's doing. I will admit, once we get to the sort of political intrigue and meeting Farnese's family, I mean, I'm mentally not as here as I was in those earlier chapters. Okay, cool. Farnese's dad is some big shot who I hope does something cool. No, okay, cool, never mind. Okay, her mum is surprisingly cool. I hope she does something cool. Nope, okay. The Kushan as an army, as an enemy to defeat, are entertaining, but I don't find them overly engaging. They're just a big evil army with the big evil dude at the center of it. But yeah, there are still interesting ideas nestled in there, like the fact that the Kushans are making demons because they've made this weird womb or heart from apostles, and like they've squished them together to make this horrible birthing chamber. Like, that's horrifying, and I'm intrigued. And even the Kushan Emperor himself goes in and ends up as the big tree man. Like, totally interesting. But then most of the arc is just following these sort of smaller skirmishes. And again, I'm more interested in the Guts character than this war. I'm not overly interested in the war because, I've got a feeling Griffith might win it. He's a god hand and has all these crazy apostles at his disposal. The manga is making it pretty clear he's not going to lose. So the Gut stuff continues to be great. It's him opening up and softening as he learns to rely on others. But then the other half of the arc is just all these skirmishes with Kushan. The other part of this arc is magic returning. And the magic is... I don't like how the magic is used in Guts' personal travels. So let's talk for a little bit about how Guts' fights are done in Berserk. So in the early days, it's more of him swinging his sword around and letting the action speak for itself. But later on, it starts to get more expository in its fight scenes. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, this was still a problem early on, but maybe I just didn't notice it as much. Like, we'll meet an evil character and they'll go, my sword has cleaved through 30 enemies. Surely it is an unbreakable sword. Yes, my sword is so unbreakable. And then Guts hits it and it breaks. What? You broke my unbreakable sword. And it's like, oh my gosh, did you really need this? Like, we can just see it. And that keeps going as the manga goes on. And especially once Guts gets his followers, they start joining in the exposition too. Like, oh my gosh, Guts can't do this. Oh my gosh, look what Guts did. He did this cool maneuver. And like, yeah, we just saw it. We don't need you to narrate it for us. The art is amazing and should be able to speak for itself. But we still get comments like, oh my gosh, Guts, you'll never beat that big man. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you beat that big man. The other part is the strange sort of repetition around the early fights after Guts gets his Berserk armor. So they run a pretty similar structure of, okay, we need the witch to do some big AoE attack, and so Guts needs to hold people off. So Guts starts holding people off, and then he puts on the Berserk armor, and then the spell is cast. But oh no, the witch is tired. Will she be able to get Guts back in time? And that's like 3 fights in a row of the exact same thing. We just went through this. And I guess that raises a larger point about what readers want their fights to be in Berserk. For me, I enjoy the fights where there is more on the line than just survival. So the Griffith and Guts fights are really interesting because, there's so much more character and purpose and point behind them. And some of those apostle fights, even in the starting chapters, it's about how dark will Guts go? How far will he push himself in order to take down the apostles? And through that time, we're learning more about what these apostles are and the God Hand, and there's all this other information woven into the fights themselves. It's not just about Guts needs to fight to live. And that works at the start, but once we're into the actual plot and we're in this big revenge quest, the fights for just the sake of having another fight feel off. I'm just not really that invested anymore because I know how it's going to go. And there's always the power-up of Guts can just put on his Berserk armor and then the witch will pull him out at the end because I know that's going to happen every time he needs it to. And yeah, that's a personal preference. I know some people need the action and the fights because that's what they're reading for. They want to see Guts swing the big sword and make the splashy with the blood. For me, I don't need another fight scene of Guts going all berserker and then getting pulled back by Shirka because this is ground the manga has already covered. We know these ideas already. So yeah, this arc is where I start to lose some of my luster for this manga. But then it ends, and the big evil demon man turns into a big tree, and then Falconia is made. And okay, I'm back on board. Seeing the realization of Griffith's dream is really interesting as far as Guts' quest goes. Because now Femto has made this world where Falconia is kind of needed. There is all these demons and trolls and all sorts out there, and people need a safe haven to go to. Like, compare it to before Falconia was there and before Femto was even around. There was plague killing everyone and a demon empire that was threatening to encroach Midland. Now people eat and have food, and from the point of view of a general peasant in Midland, it seems like their life is better now. And I'm getting dangerously close to saying that phrase about someone doing nothing wrong, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that Guts' vengeance quest becomes a lot more compelling when the reasons for revenge start to get stripped away. So as he gets closer to Casca and realizes that his vengeance quest is going to be at odds with protecting her, or the fact that the world has changed now, and the world kind of needs Falconia as it is right now. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention in the Millennium Falcon arc. There is a definite softening of Guts through this arc, especially towards the end. He becomes a much kinder person. Someone who is ready and willing to rely on other people as they help him bring him towards his goal of saving Casca. But then there's also the kind of weird subtext about all the girls getting real horny for Guts. Like Farnese is like, oh my gosh, that Guts boy, he's not too bad. And then Shirka's like, that Guts boy, not too bad. And then the little elf girl's like, you love him. That's the face of love. This is my voice. I'm an elf. Did we need this? What is this for? They did not need to fall in love with Guts. They eventually sort of tone it back down to where those characters have an affection, a non-romantic affection for Guts, where they look up to him as a leader and as a strong person that they can rely on. And that is far more interesting than just, we want to bang the big boy. I mean, Pharaoh, Guts is a good-looking boy. But no, glad that feels mostly dropped in the last arc. Then we get into the last arc, the Fantasia arc, and we get on that boat. I was up to date on Berserk around this time, and there was a lot of hiatuses and pauses between chapters. And so for me, I thought the boat took ages. Like, I felt we were there for years. But reading through it now, it's much quicker. The manga does have some moments where that is just recognized as well. Like, Guts comes up from downstairs and he's like, hey everyone, did you miss me? And we're like, no, you were here a couple of chapters ago. I know in the real world, this was years since we last saw you, but I mean, in the story, no, we just saw you like a couple of chapters ago, mate. No worries. And then we have the boat trip, and my eyes kind of just glaze over at most of the boat trip, because as I'm reading it, I'm trying to figure out if this is important and if this is going somewhere, and it's not. It's just sort of developing that the world has changed some more and doing some very light character work, but nothing really sort of happens. And I mean, I'm not doing a deep dive on this manga, I'm just taking a regular old read-through of it. And I wonder if there are like secret hidden details in this arc that make the boat trip like really interesting, and the pirate guy is like amazing, and he's got some cool backstory that ties him back to Griffith, and no idea. If there is some cool stuff in there, I totally missed it. And the boat trip itself is very uneventful for me. But then we finally get to the elf village, and I mean, I was waiting years for the elf village. I was very excited to get here. My interest peaks again. Like, this is the part where Casca might come back. And all of a sudden, I am incredibly invested because a character that I loved is coming back into the series, potentially. And there is this long, it feels like a very long build-up as we slowly get to the part where Casca can come back. Oh my gosh. Meanwhile, Rickert has gone to Falconia with his sister, and then he meets up with Griffith, and it is so interesting seeing him sort of react to this new world and the realization of Griffith's dream. Then he goes up to Griffith, and he slaps him in the face. Oh, yes. Oh, my boy. My absolute boy. I was so happy seeing that page. That slap might be one of the best panels of Berserk. The character stuff in this manga is so good. So we're in the elf village, and eventually we get to the point where Casca can be returned. And so Farnese and Shirka go into her nightmares, and it's the Eclipse Part 2. All of a sudden, oh my god, this manga just got amazing again. Like, as soon as we got to the elf village, we are back on top, baby. Like, Casca's coming back, Rickert slaps Griffith, we're gonna get this big, another look into the eclipse. I am so on board. Why did this come after a horribly boring boat trip? The dream that Farnese and Shirka go into is beautiful. Oh my gosh. The imagery and it's tying back into the eclipse. I'm just so excited. Absolutely beautiful. And then Casca returns. And there is this slow build up to when she meets Guts again. And it's just so exciting. And every single page I'm waiting for it. But then it cuts to some other stories beforehand. And it makes me absolutely fucking furious. So we're doing, Casca has just come back. And we're waiting for her to meet Guts. We have been building up to this for so much of the manga. I'm so ready for this. And then the manga cuts to some fucking side stories about Griffith going and doing raids on random monsters. I'm so angry because the manga is like teasing us on the thing that we actually want and giving us some more world building. I don't want the world building. Give me the character stuff. And then Kasuga meets Guts and she freaks out and she can't do it. And my heart breaks. And it's so good. I hate this moment because I want them to be able to talk again, to be able to reminisce and to connect, you know? That's what the manga has been building towards. We want this connection to be remade, but they can't. The traumas are so deep that they're still separated, and it's heartbreaking. And so now I'm so interested about this journey that they'll need to go on to find the ways to reconnect. Amazing. I'm vibing this manga. And then the black-haired kid shows up, and there are more clues coming out, like, what's going on? I'm just so back into this manga. And then we get to chapter 364. So chapter 364 is the last one that Miura wrote, and it was the last bit of his transcripts that went through into the manga. And for a lot of people, this is where Berserk officially ends. Berserk was Miura's vision, and at chapter 364, once he had passed, the manga goes with him. And I think I'm someone who is going to stick with the manga because I want to know where the new author takes it. But this version of Berserk has ended. A version of Berserk has died, and there is a very similar fan fiction that will be running from here on out. And it really does suck to see such a beautiful vision through a manga and the author not having the opportunity to finish it, especially when it was something so internationally beloved like Berserk is. Just the chapter itself is such a compelling place to end things as well. So this is the chapter where the small child that's been following around Kasuga is revealed to be Griffith, or turns into Griffith. And that ending shot is Griffith crying. And that is just such a beautifully poetic place for that manga to end. And for me, yeah, this is where Miura's Berserk ends for me. Berserk runs up until chapter 364, and then whatever happens from here on out is a different story. But I did read those chapters, so we should probably talk about the rest. And the other chapters make me absolutely furious. Quite frankly, the chapters after 364, we go to 375, so the last 11 chapters make me angry. So we have just built up Kasuga's return. Kasuga has come back. She's getting her bearings. She's going to reconnect with Guts, hopefully sometime soon. And then Griffith has just appeared as the small child. Okay, I'm so engaged. Everything has been set up absolutely perfectly. What happens next? Griffith immediately knocks out and steals Kasuga. She's just gone. She's just taken away to Falconia and seemingly like half hypnotized now. Okay, great. Then Guts goes into a depression. Okay, I mean, yeah, I understand. And then all of the elves and all the magical creatures in the elf land disappear for some reason, even though the world is supposed to be like embracing the new magics that was brought in when Femto came into the world, but they're just disappearing now because Griffith stole Kasuga and did something to their island. Okay. And then Rickert comes along with the Kushan army and picks up Guts and crew, and so now they're banded together. I mean, on the one hand, I understand. It's a speeding up of the plot threads and trying to sort of speed things along and bring the characters together so they can all head to their conclusion much quicker. Cool, I understand. And there's a particular problem I have with the plots merging. So a big part of Guts' journey has been the fact that his vengeance is trailing away from what he wants to do, which is to protect Kasuga, and he has to make this choice between does he give up his vengeance to pursue looking after Kasuga, or does he go after Griffith? And the thing is, with Griffith abducting Kasuga, those two things are now one and the same. He can do both at the same time. I mean, this was the big point of contention for Guts. What does he choose? Does vengeance consume him, and does he go after Griffith, or does he walk away? But now those two birds are lined up and he's one stone ready to get them both. Not a fan. It's Kasuga's abduction that makes me so furious. I've waited so long for Guts and Kasuga to meet, and it's been heartbreaking because she can't handle it yet. And I want to see that reunion, but now I can't because Griffith just pops out of nowhere and whisks her away in the space of a chapter. We should probably talk about the new art style as well. So Miura's art is absolutely gorgeous, and it has such a very distinct style in the way that it does action and in the way that things are drawn. Then we come to the new style, which is a facsimile of the old one. It looks similar, but it is done digitally. And I've seen people rag on the new art style, and it's not. And I don't get it. Like, it's not bad, it's just different. The problem is we got, like, Whittaker's chocolate. It's such a New Zealand reference, Whittaker's chocolate. I mean, we were treated to caviar for so long, now we're just having fish, and people are like, well, this is horrible. That's not bad. It's just we were accustomed to like the highest tier of goodness. So the art's not bad. It's just in comparison, it doesn't feel right for the series. It feels off. And I don't envy the new author at all. That's got to be like the hardest job in the world to try and take the reins of this series. Actually, there hasn't been a new chapter in like 6 months, so I need to Google what this dude is up to. How's he doing? Wait, hang on. This is the guy that did Holy Land. Holy Land's good. This poor dude. He's a good mangaka. Okay, so it sounds like he is still doing things, and I feel so bad for this dude. Like I said at the start, there are some very vocal people around this series who are very precious of this manga. And sadly, knowing how the internet works, I hope this guy gets some love for what he does. Okay, let me pull out some comments that other people made. Brewis makes a good point that I totally forgot to mention. Griffith and Guts are very distinctly different in design. And Griffith is built up to be this beautiful, beatific savior. And Guts is the horrible, gross, dirty monster killer. The fact that they're so different does make a compelling rivalry between them. And yeah, that's such a clever design choice, both visually and in their characters. Shapan points out one of the big downsides to this manga is that it doesn't have an ending. And yeah, I think that is valid criticism. It's not a criticism of the authors, it's not a criticism of anyone who's worked on the series, it's a criticism of the series itself. People like having conclusions to their stories. And if a series doesn't have one, it's fair enough to say, I don't like that. There are people I will not recommend Berserk to because it doesn't end. They also mentioned the overuse of the adult attack in the manga. Going back to it, I kind of agree. My issue with it is that it is, how do I describe it? There's a difference between how it is done between the boys and the girls. When it happens to the boy, it is very big and important and a defining moment of the character. But then there's a lot more of it to the girls, and it's never important. Well, actually, apart from once. But there's a lot more cases of it happening. And yes, it feels like for a while, every villain wants to get into Casca during the Golden Age, and it's like, oh, can we just not? Oh, I got a spicy one in the comments. Someone saying that people who say Berserk falls off after the Golden Age are simply idiots to not recognize its greatness. Well, I guess I'm an idiot because that actually sounds legit. I think the eclipse is the peak of the manga, so by definition, it does fall off afterwards. That's not saying the rest is bad. That's not even saying the rest isn't fantastic. It's just saying that the eclipse is the best moment of Berserk, and it hasn't hit that high again. I think there are highs and lows, and some of those key parts in the Fantasia arc near the end, they're starting to get back up to that level where the eclipse was. But for me, reading through the Kushan arc, I cannot in good conscience say that that is anywhere near as interesting as the Golden Age stuff. Groovy, that is all for Berserk. What did you think? Would I recommend this manga? Absolutely, this manga is so good. I didn't have the life-changing, god-encountering experience that some people have had with this manga, but that's just kind of big seinen in general. People say the same thing about Kingdom. People say the same thing about Vagabond, especially. For me, it's just a good manga. Like, it's a good read. It's a great read and one I've been a fan of for a long time. Even just rereading it again for book club, I went through this whole manga in like 2 days because I didn't want to put it down. On a scale of good read to bad read, I'd put this on the good read side. As for next month, it looks like we have decided on Usagui. That was second place last time, so it looks like it managed to sneak the win this time. So that will be for March. Thanks everyone for joining us for book club. Leave your thoughts on Berserk in the comments, and we will see you guys next month for Usagui. This has been CG, and I will see you Gs in the next one.